It it feels very much like home to be here. So thank you for the welcome. Originally, when we talked about what I would be talking about today, when we said the title or what the topic would be, I offered the title ECM/AEU History in 21 volumes. That seemed a little extreme, but what we were talking about is the 21 volumes that are the combined or compiled volumes of an AEU serial publication, which was originally called Ethical Addresses. This serial was published between 1895 and 1914, and it began just as ethical culture was entering its 20th year and ended right about the time when wars and rumors of wars were circulating through across the planet. Fortunately for all of us, I have a better subtitle, which works just as well, to say that instead we're going to talk about insights about philosophy and questions about history from the bibliography of ethical culture. Or we can do it in the reverse, and we can say questions about philosophy and insights about history as they might occur in the bibliography of ethical culture. Either way, I'm pretty sure the question you all are asking right now is, what is the bibliography of ethical culture? The bibliography of or for ethical culture, I can't ever decide which preposition I need to use, but that is my project for the sesquicentennial or 150th anniversary of the founding of ethical culture. My primary motivation for working on this particular bibliography comes from my own desire to know more about ethical culture as a movement and as a way to become a better person. As a new member of the Ethical Society of Austin not that many years ago, I received a warm welcome, a copy of Edward Erickson's The Humanist Way, and a t-shirt. I did not, until I had the privilege of attending the AEU's Lay Leadership Summer School in 2016, have any further instruction on the living and the doing of ethical culture, aside from what arose during our platforms and colloquies. Working on this bibliography has been my way of discovering more resources for study. And it's become my mission not only to find more resources, but to document them for others so that you can find them if this is what you want to do, to make these resources available for myself and others to read, study, and I do long for the day to talk about it, discuss it. My approach to the project has been very simple. Locate everything I can find written by or about someone associated with ethical culture and document it using the Chicago Manual of Style. As a practical matter, I started with online resources to which I had free access. Fortunately, Google and Microsoft have both undertaken massive projects to digitize several academic and public libraries, including the New York Public Library. And several organizations, including Project Gutenberg, the Internet Library, formerly known as the Wayback Machine, and the Hathi Trust, have created online repositories for these digitized works. Those that are in the public domain, meaning usually those that are printed before 1923, are available for reading and sometimes even for downloading from these sites. My starting point for the bibliography was the serial publication of the American Ethical Union called Ethical Addresses, and that was entirely available, all 21 volumes, on the Internet Library, and I downloaded it to my computer. As of today, I have documented the contents of all 21 volumes, covering that period from 1895 to 1911. And soon, or actually in 1914, soon I will begin developing a plan for the next phases of the project, and that will include continuing to seek publications online, but also books and articles that are still in print and under copyright. So what's the point? What have I discovered while doing bibliographic entries and chasing down missing links? I could say lots of wonderful things and begin listing them, but I think we'll only have time to talk about 3 wonderful things today. the early years of the American Ethical Union, the early years of the International Ethical Union, and the early ethical culture leaders who worked besides Felix Adler while Ethical Addresses was one of the main publications of the movement. So, history. The ethical culture movement we know was founded in 1876 when Felix Adler spoke to an audience of about 100 at Stanton Hall about a new way of meeting. Over the next 20 years, he gathered several men to serve as lecturers and help with the work of the New York Society, its ethical culture school, and the public projects that members of the society undertook. These lecturers then helped expand the movement to other cities. Chicago in 1883, founded by William McIntyre Salter. Philadelphia in 1885, founded by S. Burns Weston. St. Louis in 1886, founded by Walter Sheldon. And London in 1887, founded by Stanton Coit. When the first issue of Ethical Addresses was published in 1895, there were then 2 ethical societies in London and several in Germany. In Germany, they had a headquarters in Berlin and branches in Frankfurt am Main, Strasbourg, Kiel, Magdeburg, and elsewhere. There were also, at that point in time, early efforts underway to establish ethical societies in France and Belgium. Okay. The first issue of Ethical Addresses included 10 addresses from these 4 authors: Felix Adler, William Salter, Walter Sheldon, and M.M. Mangasarian. Adler, of course, was the senior lecturer at the New York Society, and his topics were, what do we stand for, the modern saint, and prayer and worship. The second contributor, William Salter, who founded the Chicago Society in 1883, was at the time this thing was published serving in Philadelphia. And his topics were an ethical view of life, morality, what does it mean, and the highest rule of life. Contributor number 3, Walter Sheldon, was the founder and lecturer at the St. Louis Society, and he talked about what does it mean to be religious and what is religion, and also true liberalism. And finally, there's M.M. Mangasarian, who is by birth from an Armenian Turk who immigrated to the U.S. and served first as a Presbyterian pastor before he resigned to become a lecturer on independent religion. He eventually served as a lecturer at the Chicago Society from 1892 to 1900, when he again left his post to organize the Free Religious Society in Chicago. But his 2 essays in this volume were The Religion of Ethical Culture and Teaching and Teachers. Now, I won't review all 21 volumes in such detail, but this list of articles gives you the tone of the serial for the first few years. And my interpretation of this content is that in Ethical Addresses, the lecturers were focusing very heavily on defining ethical culture and marking its place as a non-theistic religion. One essay that does stand out as a sign of things to come was Mangasarian's Teaching and Teachers, because education, especially what will be called moral education, is given increasing prominence in the later issues. In fact, in series number 18, published in 1911, there's a complete curriculum for teaching 3rd and 4th graders about ethics. And as the series develops, there will also appear lectures relating to current events, leaning heavily toward peace and human rights. Yeah, okay. With that as background, I want to highlight these 3 areas. First, we will look at the founding and purposes of the American Ethical Union. Second, we will look at the founding and purposes of the International Union of Ethical Societies. And third, very briefly, I will circle back to this first generation of lecturers in their role in the movement. The American Ethical Union was founded in 1889. Although I don't have access to any of the papers that document this notion, it seems reasonable to me, from what we know about Felix Adler, that after their early period of apprenticeship, as he and his fellow leaders worked to found these new societies, they would periodically meet to discuss issues and concerns that might arise in the course of leading their respective societies. 3 years after the establishment of the Third Society in the U.S., the need for a more formal organization would have seemed desirable. This would fit in with the belief that the ethical societies were part of a movement, and it would need its own programs to facilitate the growth and development of the movement. And indeed, once the first London Society was established, I imagine there would also have arisen the idea of needing an international organization. Throughout the series, especially when Ethical Addresses is combined with another publication called Ethical Record, to be renamed Ethical Addresses and Ethical Record, there is evidence of the work of the American Ethical Union. I found it interesting to read the early bylaws of the AEU, particularly as its aims and purposes were defined. Now, I'm going to refer here to the AEU bylaws published in volume 14 in 1907, since I haven't seen earlier documentation from this. And Article 2 relates to objects. That's what we would call purpose or mission. Section 1 says the general aim of the union is, quote, to assert the supreme importance of the ethical factor in all the relations of life, personal, social, national, and international, apart from any theological and metaphysical considerations. Next comes a list of the special aims. There are 8 of them. A, to bring the organizations in the union into closer fellowship of thought and action. B, to promote and to assist in the establishment of ethical organizations in all sections of the United States. C, to organize propaganda and to arrange ethical lecturing tours. D, to publish and spread suitable literature. E, to promote ethical education in general and systematic moral instruction in particular, apart from theological and metaphysical presuppositions. F, to promote common action by means of special congresses and otherwise upon public issues which call for ethical clarification. And finally, to further objects that are in harmony with the general aim of the union. Now, looking at the general aim, to assert the supreme importance of the ethical factor may seem a little grandiose in its wording, but to me, it seems very like we say, ethics is central, and it's urging us to tell people about it. Nowadays, we're told that ethical culture is a religion of relationships, and here, as the general aim, is the application of the ethical factor to all of our relationships, personal, community, and our country. It seems in this paragraph that the AEU is tasked with making this assertion both to members and non-members. And similarly, the special aims, apart from, again, some outdated language, also seem to speak to the present. We could talk to the president, but the present. The expectation in A is that AEU will bring its members into relationships which contribute to closer fellowship of thought and action. To me, that sounds like training and workshops on how to carry out operations and programs, as well as conferences and symposia to explore ideas and issues of concern. The expectation in B is that the AEU will engage in new society development to spread the movement, quote, to all sections of the United States. Expectation in C uses propaganda. Okay, that's not a pretty word anymore, but to refer to public relations, but also it seems to include outright proselytizing. Look at D, that aims toward publishing, which AEU used to do, but not so much anymore. And part of the work of the bibliography will be to highlight contemporary thinkers in the movement and nudge them towards publishing. And maybe AEU could be part of that. Now consider E. Ethical education in the societies is not universal. Austin no longer has a Sikh program. But this aim seems to encourage us to focus on educating children in ethics. And it also looks at the public schools as a place to, without urging any theological or metaphysical presuppositions, see that ethics is part of the school curriculum. Paragraph F looks at public engagement. I really like the phrase, issues which call for ethical clarification. Right now, the AEU does not issue statements on such issues, but in the past, the union has taken a larger role in the public dialogue. And I think we could say that today there are still a few issues that are in need of ethical clarification. And of course, there's that last one, other duties as assigned, other actions as needed and appropriate. I found this information interesting in the present context. The AEU is in a period of transition, and in the past few months, we've often heard the question, what does the AEU do? We might also ask, what should the AEU do? And we might ask, are there any answers in these old aims? Shifting now to the International Union of Ethical Societies, Felix Adler reported to the New York Society about what he experienced at the first Congress held in Zurich in 1896. That's in Volume 3. He details the activities reported by the ethical societies that attended from all over Europe. And then he turned to the problem he saw. And this is a long paragraph. Bear with me, I'm going to read it. Now, all this is very laudable and very interesting, but it did seem to me as if there was one thing lacking in the foreign ethical societies, or at least if not lacking, yet not sufficiently pronounced. That is the spiritual element. I do not mean anything mystical when I use the word spiritual. When we think of morality, if we concentrate our attention on the act, on the external part of it, then we are not spiritual. But if we care chiefly for the spirit in which the act is done, then we take the spiritual view. It seemed to me as if the spiritual side, though not wanting by any means among the leaders, in fact, it was beautifully emphasized by some of the leaders, was nevertheless too much neglected, as if the drift were in an external direction, as if the feeling prevailed that the ethical society exists for the benefit of others. I've always felt that this was the wrong attitude to take. I've always felt that an ethical society should take the ground that it exists primarily for the moral benefit of its own members. It is in this way that I have distinguished in my mind between the real members and the quasi-members of an ethical society. The real member of an ethical society is the person who feels that he has not yet morally finished his education, that he is in need of moral development, in need of help, and looks upon the society as a means of helping him in his moral development. The quasi-member is the person who merely appreciates the society insofar as it is doing good for others. He's no real member. At best, only an ally, an associate. Now, I felt that this sort of external feeling prevails to a considerable degree in the foreign societies, as it still largely exists in our own. So, from another perspective, we have in the next year's series a report of that same Congress from the new secretary of the new international organization, Dr. F. W. Forster, Jr., reported on Adler's address to the Congress in these words. The address given the following evening by Professor Felix Adler, the founder of the ethical movement, on our common aims, proved to be of importance in the outlook it opened and the influence it exercised on the deliberations of the Congress. For him, all merely external results achieved by the movement are of minor significance. The true practice cannot appear unless a social regeneration has previously taken place in every individual. In assigning the chief prominence to the moral renewal of the inner life, Professor Adler pointed out, at the same time, the necessary consequences which a thoroughly sincere person who lays the principal stress on the inner side of reform must draw, so far as the social and economic distress of the present day is concerned. This elucidation was the more timely, as many of the Continental leaders were under the mistaken impression that the ethical movement in America has taken the shape of a sort of religious sect and does not attempt to exert a decisive influence upon the attitude and conduct of its members with respect to social and political questions. This impression indeed seemed for the moment to receive additional confirmation when Professor Adler proceeded to warn against the tendency to overemphasize activity in the external field and declared that as members of the ethical societies, we are to see to it primarily that we save our own souls alive, that it is our inward integrity which we must seek to rescue. But it was speedily made plain that no mere retirement into a sequestered ethical individualism was intended, but that the position indicated contained within itself the very strongest motives to the exercise of social energies. And he really does go on there for a long time. And I should point out that as he got more serious about, I'm sorry, let me just read this. You have to hear it. That first of all and chiefly by achieving our inner release from the evil powers that today devastate mankind. Forster lasted for a year, and then he left ethical culture and converted to Catholicism. But he made the point, he got it, that Adler was saying that from the very beginning of our international federation, there was concern that ethical culture was being distorted into a social justice or social service organization. And Adler's repeated assertion, that is at least my understanding, repeated assertion is that our goal is our own personal moral and ethical growth and improvement, and our practice in social service and social action is how we learn and grow. At least that's, again, what I've seen in reading this. Interestingly, more than 100 years later, this same tension remains in the AEU and in some of our local societies. We ask, are we all about ethics, or are we all about the practice of ethics? And somehow we always seem to ask the question as either or and never as both and. One more thing about that first Congress that I found interesting. It produced an ethical manifesto 40 some years before the Humanist Manifesto. And here's a sample, very quickly. We regard resistance to wrong and oppression as a sacred duty and believe that under existing circumstances, conflict is still indispensable as a means of clarifying men's ideas of right and of obtaining better conditions. We demand, however, that the conflict be carried on within the limits prescribed by morality, in the interest of society as a whole, and with a constant eye to the final establishment of social peace as the supreme consummation. And about that, all I'm going to say is Ukraine, Gaza, and ethical clarification. Almost through. The final focus that I wanted to bring is on that first generation of leaders, Adler, Sheldon, Salter, Weston, and Coit. Just briefly, what I can say at this point is that these early leaders came to ethical culture from a variety of religious traditions, only Adler from Reform Judaism and the others from other traditions. And together they worked to refine our understanding of what a religion can be that is not centered around a God. They worked within their diverse cities to find solutions to not so diverse human problems. And they wrote and spoke and created resources where there was nothing or not so much. It is partly so that I can learn more about what these founding leaders had to say that I work on the bibliography for, I think I like for, ethical culture. It is also so that you and other members of the AEU can learn what resources are available and how to find them if you want to learn more yourself. So what's my next step? I'm going to tie up some loose ends on this phase of the project and plan the next phases. I do want to make sure that our living leaders, 21st century thinkers, are included. There are also some fairly difficult to manage resources archived at the New York Society that I want to help preserve and make more accessible to readers. I will work on this project as long as I'm able because I love this work. I can't tell you how much fun I have solving bibliographic mysteries. But we could use more hands and more eyes. And if you or someone you know might be interested, have them get in touch with me. If you just want to keep up on the progress of the bibliography, you can check out the Biblioblog for ethical culture. I try to post an update every Wednesday. And with that, I think we've touched a little bit here and there on history, on philosophy, and where do we go next. I thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'll stop talking and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was really, really interesting and makes me want to also see if you have this in writing and you could send it to us.
I do, sort of. I had to cut a lot. It was much longer, but
okay. I think that would be.
Let me edit it. I will.
Okay. And we can't pass the baskets, but this is the time we normally do pass the baskets. So just remember, you can always go out to our website at any time and make a donation, or you can put a little extra in next week's donation to cover this week, however you might feel moved. So we'll go into Q&A, and Chris, I see you have your hand up.
Yes. Two things. One, regarding what you just said, Dorothy. We're in our pledge campaign for 2024. So if you've not had a chance to make your pledge for 2024, please let us know what that will be. Sent out an email, a MailChimp about that a while back. Please feel free to interact with me about making a pledge, and I will be happy to work with you. Getting now to Carolyn, she mentioned the Biblioblog, but I don't remember hearing how to access that. Carolyn, can you put that in the chat?
Yes, I'll drop the blog. I'll drop the link right now.
Excellent. I thought your talk was very interesting, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Brett?
Yeah, I had a question all lined up for it, but what you said sort of at the end changed my thinking a bit to ask a different question. So I may come back later, but when you say that the concept that was being advanced was, and I'm reading my notes over here, personal growth is primary, and the practice of ethical culture is how we grow. It almost seems kind of selfish in a way. How did Adler and those address that kind of criticism, or did they?
We talk about altruism must be selfless. It's not altruism if you're not doing it for someone without expectation of reward. But when we do things for other people, oftentimes we are motivated as we learn, as we feel we have empathy for their situation. And in response to their difficulty, our feeling of their pain is eased by helping to ease their pain. It's very much like act so as to elicit the best in others and thereby in themselves. You do act to elicit the best in others, hoping somehow that you're doing something helpful to that other person. But the process of learning, thinking in their shoes or walking in their shoes a little bit to try to understand them better, helps our own personal growth. We become more aware, more sensitive, better people as a result of that. I'm not real sure. I'm just now starting on my journey to learn some things, but Adler seemed to say this over and over again. He talked about the fact that what we're trying to do is we want to be, he used the word moral an awful lot. I'm uncomfortable with the word moral. I've had too many years with Baptists, so I'm a little nervous about it. But he used moral as often as he used ethical. And he's talking about we are trying to be better people. Now, he was an idealist, and as I understand it, he felt that there was a sort of ideal for us to try to achieve. We might not know what it is, we might not be able to define it, but always we would be seeking to be better people. And he seemed to think that that was okay, that wanting to be a better person was justification enough, that we should, in fact, should all want to be better, that should be almost a primary goal. I've muddled it, but that's, I mean, there's just a great deal.
Thank you.
Just repeating that and then saying, but okay, let me just give you this. He wrote that in that first issue, there was prayer and worship. I was startled to see a platform on prayer and worship. What could the man have meant? So I took the time to read that one. And basically for Adler, prayer is work and worship is work. And later on in Consolations, when he talks about you have grief and you've lost someone, you work. So the deed, the work that we do for others is our form of prayer, is our form of worship, is how we cope. And it's just an essential part of trying to be a better person.
Thank you.
Jan,
I know you've been putting a lot of effort into this for a long time. I'm wondering if you have discovered anything about some of the origins of the organizations that we accredit to ourselves as having founded. A little bit ago, Joan Lewis put on a workshop or a talk on women in ethical culture. And I can't remember the name, but she came down to a person, she said, who founded the Visiting Nurses Association. Well, we've always talked about ethical culture founded the Ethical Nurses Association, and it turned, from her point of view, it was one person who is an ethical culturist. And we do the same thing with the NAACP. The people who, several ethical culturists helped found, and we're original founders and everything, but we kind of ascribe it to the ethical culture movement founded it. And I don't know about the Working Man's School, how that was, but can you clarify any of that?
Two things come to mind with this. First of all, in the archives, in the AEU archives that have been digitized, there are some 1-page, 2-page documents that describe these major ACLU, NAACP, and that talk about the formation of those. So there is, it's why we can't, we need a library. I want a library for ethical culture, so you can just go there and say, oh, there it is. I can read this. I can have it. So that's there. And I'll send, okay, wait a minute. Send, okay, I'll do it. Send to Jan. Okay, I'll try to remember. The other thing is, yes, when we talk about the ethical culture movement did this and the ethical culture movement did that. Well, yes, individuals had to do it. John Lovejoy Elliott is one man. He moved into a particular area of New York to be among the people that he wished to serve, and saw things that disturbed him, saw kids playing in the street getting into trouble, and said, we need to give them something fun and better to do. So eventually that led to the Hudson Guild. Many people in the New York Society worked with him on that, contributed to it and whatever, but it started with one man's work. And over again, you can look, one person thought it was important to do whatever it was, whether it's nursing or race relations or civil rights or any of those kinds of things, oftentimes it's one person says this matters, and then they may have, not single-handedly, we never do these things alone, but they may have pulled together the right people to help make it happen. It's over and over in our history that oftentimes it's just that spark, one person does it and brings it to fruition. But together we support it. So there's that piece.
But for instance, like with the NAACP, there's nothing documented that says the ethical culture movement, supports or sponsors or anything this organization.
Well, I think it was Felix Adler's idea to have the first International Racist Congress that was held in London. I think that came from him. But he was not the only person organizing it or making it happen. And I don't have the dates in mind of that. I think NAACP, there were some founding documents and several people from ethical culture signed those, but they were not the only ones who signed them. I think Jane Addams was on the first board of the NAACP, and someone else, I forgot his name, but one of our others was on the board. But there were many people on the board. So it's just something sometimes we had the idea, sometimes I don't know about the ACLU. I think in the nursing, that idea was there. The kindergarten idea already existed, but oftentimes for the AEU or for the New York Society, whoever was doing it, it took one person to spark, and then people joined together. And often we were partnering with other people from other organizations to make it happen.
Thank you.
Todd.
Yes, I was intrigued, Carolyn, when you mentioned that Adler said, I guess in the international things, that there wasn't enough spiritual emphasis. Could you elaborate on that? That piqued my curiosity.
Well, he was speaking of spiritual in the sense of feeling and attitude, but not with supernatural elements to it. It's just our inner spirit, if you will. And I relate to what he had to say about how if you do something in a particular spirit, maybe an humble spirit, a giving spirit, a caring spirit, then it has more meaning than if you just do it because you are not busy and you're just doing it. I recently, maybe a year ago, I had to go to a local hospital to have an outpatient procedure done. It wasn't a big deal, but I was at that time unable to walk very far. So they ordered a wheelchair for me. And the fellow who came, he just came up to the waiting room area, and he had the wheelchair, and he stopped. And he made the sign of the cross. And then he came over to me to take me to where I needed to get an x-ray or whatever. And I was struck by that. I remember that because it wasn't his job. He wasn't being paid to help me, even though that was his job and he was being paid. It was an act of caring and compassion. And was that a blessing? Is that what the cross does? He sought blessing for an act of compassion and caring to do it. And it seems to me that was much more meaningful to him than it would have been for anybody else doing the same kind of thing, which is an ordinary mundane task of helping. And I think he just talks about the attitude and feeling that we have when we're approaching these, that makes it extra and more special.
Chris. You're muted.
What has been the AEU's reaction, and by that I guess I mean the board, to your work? Are they embracing your work? Are they saying you're totally on your own and we have nothing to do with you. How receptive have they been to your work? I guess is what by that, either the board or the leadership. I see Hugh Taft Morales is one of the people following your blog. I'm curious what's been the general reaction.
I haven't actually approached the board or the AEU about the project. This is sort of my first public statement kind of thing. I have been working with the New York Society because I traveled there in September, October to have access to their archives, and I hope we're going to be partnering on some grants to get more work done on their archives and the bibliography. But so far, it's just a personal project. I would like for it to have more. I would like to start finding ways for more people to know about it so you can use it. The bibliography is online. It's available. Anybody with the link can read it and check it out. If not everybody likes bibliographies, I know, but if you wanted to know some of the, well, you can do a keyword search and sometimes things will turn up. There's a lot of platforms on Jesus and a lot of platforms, but on Russia, so you could see what there's research that can be done, but it's available now. And I wouldn't mind if more people knew about it. So I'm trying to find ways to publicize it. I can't remember, you, Taft Morales, and I talked about something and he said, oh, let me look. And from there, I had a follower. Kind of fun.
I'm wondering if you would mind if we linked to your website, to your blog from our website.
Oh my goodness, be still my beating heart.
All right. Wanted to make sure. That would be one way to get the word out, at least to a few people who look at our website. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. How very nice.
And Maura, but you're muted. Not
I
anymore.
was actually thinking about Carolyn's response to the question about, why people do things, why do these positive things as opposed, do you just go out and feed the hungry because it's the thing to do, or do you put basically heart into it? And Carolyn, your description of the gentleman who brought the wheelchair, I kind of feel like in some ways, I mean, he may have been doing the sign of the cross, but it almost reminds me a little bit more of Buddhism or Taoism, of being right here in the now with what you're doing. And I just wondered what you thought about that particular characterization.
Well, I'm not so familiar with Buddhism to be able to respond to that, but I think that there may be several ways in various philosophies and belief systems to talk about this relationship with each other. And that is when we do something, if we're collecting food for the food bank, that's what we consider an ethical action. But it's part of our connection to the people who are going to be needing and using or consuming that food, even though we don't meet them directly. If we are bringing it in a spirit of caring and sharing and thinking about those people at the same time we're loading the groceries, I can't help but think that that's an extra meaning, extra layer added to the effort. And I think it's part then of building our sensitivity, our sensitivity to the suffering of others, the needs of others, making us aware of how we are related and connected.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you.
Fred, and you're muted.
Yeah. So one of the things that you said that sort of got my focus right away was that ethics should be part of the public school curricula as a separate item from religion, not in a religious context. So I started thinking, how does that work? And I'm sure Adler and others in that era had thought about this probably rather extensively. Are there specific sort of curricula that they had laid out that are out there that you've come across? And can you tell us a little bit about any of that?
I didn't actually study it much, but there was a lot of interest in what they called moral education. We call it ethical education, and I'm more comfortable with that term. But they looked at it in terms of the schools, and there were moral education conferences happening approximately every 4 years between 19 something and 1934. So maybe 30 years worth of several of these conferences happening. And ministers of education and whatnot would be attending or sending staff to look at this. It may have been just a reflection of the time, because when you say moral, everybody's kind of interested in, how you behave and how you act, and there's no telling what interpretations they were putting on it. But he was thinking of the basic ethical, well, no, let me just say, it's hard to know with Adler exactly where he's going, because he was a little hung up on sex. I mean, not hung up, but he was conservative about that, and conservative about women. He just, bless his heart. So he was a man of his time, and his upbringing, and there he was. But by the same token, he did understand, if you take that piece out of it, he was looking at those fundamental values that we talk about in ethics: honesty, fairness, transparency, those kinds of things, and looking at ways to get that as part of what is taught in the school, because the feeling is that if you don't teach children when they're young, they're not going to learn it when they're adults, or it's going to be harder for them to learn. So always talk to the children. And yes, there's curriculum. I'm sure there are big, fat, huge archives of all of this stuff. But in a late edition, it's in my blog, but I'll have to look it up. One of the late edition, never mind, don't quote me on the number, but actually was it Black or it's John Lovejoy Elliott, who was teaching at the ethical culture school, and he put the entire curriculum, it was took it was two different in a series for the third and fourth graders, and it talks about what they read and what they talk about. And several times there was one time he even did a almost like a transcript of a dialogue between a teacher and the student, asking questions and helping them learn. So it's there. And I would say, I don't want to go off screen now, but I'd say if you go into the bibliography and you find the Eliot, you'll find that curriculum, some of that there. And I haven't done all the links just so, but up at the top, each one of these volumes is linked to the Internet Archive, so you can just punch that.
Yeah, I was looking at it as we were talking, so I looked him up. Thanks, because I'll stop and let Todd.
Yeah, you might. Some of it might be useful. You might want to update the language, but.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Todd.
Yeah, hi. Just one more thing. I have a quote here from Felix Adler that I'd love to get your reaction to, Carolyn. He says, "In the glow of achievement, we are apt to be full of a false self-importance. But in moments of weakness, we realize through contrast the infinitely superior strength of the power whose very humble organs and ministers we are. It is then we come to understand that, isolated from it, we are nothing. At one with it, identified with it, we participate in its eternal nature, in its resistless course."
Oh, yeah. Adler was an idealist. He also had some influence early, not hugely, but some influence from Emerson and his transcendentalism.
Hmm.
And I think I still don't, I mean, I haven't studied enough to know fully to understand all of the spaces of his philosophy, but I think he thought there was something transcendent. There was something out there that we have not seen, we may not be able to see, but it is something to which we could aspire and be connected. He was adamant that it was not a God, but he writes, it may be consolations, I'm not real sure. He talks about the silence not empty. And I put a picture of the stars. So if you find a picture of the stars on the blog, that's that not empty silence that just spoke to me so beautifully, that image. And I think he felt that the universe is immense and we are small, but we are part of it. And there's a connecting thread there. I may be projecting my own viewpoint on some of that, but I can see how we could easily, in success, think I'm pretty much it right now, but also be humbled by failure to realize that, failing, he often said, or he did say, failing was a success because you tried and you learn from the failure. I think scientists do that too. Negative results are results. So to that extent, I don't know. I think he was an idealist with transcendental tendencies, and that's a piece of it, but I'm not sure I can even approach it beyond that.
Thank
So I have a question that I'm actually going to address to Todd, because I got lost in that quote. And towards the end of the quote, the word it was used. You have to be connected to it. What is the it?
The power.
The
You
power.
mentioned the power, yes. The infinitely superior strength of the power, whose very humble organs and ministers we are.
So it sounds like God, but it's not.
Well, but it's certainly not. It is then we come to understand that isolated from it, from the power, we are nothing.
Okay.
At one with it, identified with it, we participate in its eternal nature, in its resistless course. So, yeah, it's not some God up there with a beard and everything and doing the, dictation and moving pawns around the table. It's the essence, the power, the universe, is my interpretation.
So these are not well thought out comments or questions.
Welcome to my world.
What? Oh,
welcome to my world.
Okay. So Carolyn, last week we actually had John Dakin. We hosted John Dakin talking about revitalizing ethical culture, and in a very narrow sense or a very superficial sense, they're kind of complementary. Although you're going into much more, you're opening up, a huge number of resources for people to learn more, and whereas John, I think, presented us with some basic thoughts about the early philosophy. But one of the things he did sort of this call and response to gauge how much we might know about ethical culture. So for example, the quote, treat others to elicit the best in them, they're blah, 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 blah. But the last thing he mentioned was ethical, and several of us were able to say manifold. But I would love to see a blog post on the ethical manifold, because isn't this all tied in with that power, that connection, that, in fact, I have to say, I don't know much about Adler. I had some of Randy Best's training. At one point, he did some adult education for our society. And I remember hearing about the ethical manifold. And then at some point, not long after that, I read a book that included sort of the discovery of electricity. And I just kept thinking, oh my God.
That's it. That's
Sorry,
it.
say again?
That's it. That's it. I mean, you're there, you're hitting it. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you.
That's okay. I was blathering on. I would love to see a blog post on the ethical manifold.
I would probably be shot down very quickly if I did that, but I haven't absorbed all of his ethical principles and life and whatever kind of thing. I'm a first grader.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
not a graduate. On the
Okay.
other hand, it speaks to me when he says ethical manifold. Manifold, I look at the word, he's using the word as this in the same sense as we say twofold, threefold, fourfold. Manifold is manyfold.
Oh,
This
okay.
multiple. And in another essay, he talks about, quote, the ethical unit. Each person, he means, and he explains it, when I call a person an ethical unit, it's like an atom. It's like a piece of stuff that then multiple pieces of stuff, multiple people as ethical units become the ethical manifold.
Okay.
What do you do with that? It kind of felt like he thought that was powerful. And that's why I was thinking about your electricity idea.
Well, you could also maybe use the word humanity, right?
Yeah, exactly. When L. Miller died and Nori Ross spoke at his memorial service, I was grieving for him, and I carried grief for family members that were gone. And she talked about how, when she was referring to Elle, she just said, remember that we are all made of energy, and energy never dies. And that stuck with me. It was healing for me. It let me process my grief in a more positive way. And I was really grateful for that image, which I hadn't had before. But it sticks with me because when we're talking about the manifold and we're talking about the power of all of us united together, it's not like we're all, I really hope he didn't think we could all wish it true. We could all just, hold hands and make something really positive happen. But it is that kind of thing where the energy of our combined efforts together could have a positive effect. And then again, Dorothy, I don't know, but I think it's a puzzle, and some people haven't been able to solve it. And I may be looking at it in too elementary a way. But
Thank you.
I like the idea of being connected, that we're all star stuff, and ultimately we're together. That one I like.
Yeah.
Fred.
Fred.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Sure, I'm sorry for asking so many questions, but this is the one I was going to ask first. So, one of the things that you mentioned that was among the principles that Adler was talking about, and the other original sort of founding members at the time, was to explain public issues needing moral guidance.
Yeah.
My question is, well, that's dangerous, right? I mean, that's politics. You're getting into politics. You're getting into issues that are going to potentially really piss people off. And so my question is, do you have any ideas if that happened at the time and how that was handled? And did it cause people to say, well, if that's what ethical culture is, I'm going to go somewhere else?
Might be. I know of 2 incidents, and I don't know the full, I mean, again, I'm just looking through one lens, the ethical addresses. I haven't even gotten to the other stuff to even know. But there was the case, who did I say, was it Salter, who went from Chicago to Philadelphia and then he went back to Chicago. Apparently there was something, I think Bulgaria sounds like a possible thing, that there were somebody got a pardon and he either spoke for it or against it. I don't know which. And members of the society were very upset, whichever position he took. And it made sense for him to go away for a while before he went back again. And so there are that kind of incidents have happened, apparently. You know, not everybody agrees on things. Felix Adler, and I cut it out because I didn't have time for this aside, but in one of his speeches that I had to track down, he called out, oh crud, it wasn't Grover Cleveland, it was the other one. I'm sorry. Let me just, I can't remember. It was a fellow who was candidate for governor, and he'd had a child out of wedlock. He acknowledged the child, he gave child support, he was, but he was not married to the mother.
Oh,
Didn't marry the mother. And Felix Adler felt that that was immoral and he shouldn't do that. Now, he was running against Blaine for governor. I think this was for New York governor. And I think it was Grover Cleveland, but no,
I
anyway.
think Grover Cleveland had a
It's Grover Cleveland, yeah, okay.
child out of wedlock.
Thank you. And Blaine was apparently part of the machine of Tammany Hall or something. Anyway, he was corrupt. And Adler just said, you know, neither one of them have got the character of the kind of person that we want in office. So vote for somebody else. I mean, he actually said, vote for somebody else. And none of the above, anybody but those 2. So he was characterizing, he did get involved to that extent in what he was saying. Now, you might not be able to do that so easily these days. As 501c3, you're not supposed to get involved in elections in quite that way, so wouldn't do. But I think it was Sheldon. I guess Sheldon and Salter mixed up. They're too close, but I think it was Sheldon who talked about the public spirit, that we have to have a public spirit and be involved in our community. So they're clearly not saying you're going to improve your moral inner being and just be a good person sitting there and doing nothing. You're doing it so that you can practice what you're saying. And so I think there's a great deal of support, if you will, in those early days for paying attention to what's going on in government at all levels, especially when it relates to the values that we have that remarkably close to contemporary ideas of human rights. Well, except for the woman thing. But
yeah, but I mean, but in spite of his so-called, you could almost call it meddling in politics,
yeah,
they were able to immensely grow the ethical culture movement.
huge.
So he didn't really care if he pissed off a few people.
Oh, okay, I'll never be able to document what's gone on in the New York Times. There are 1,400 references to Felix Adler's name in the archives there. I'm just not get there. But once in a while, I find something that just pops up in one of my searches. And the man snark, casting shade, burn. He could, he would respond to, because they had a reporter there almost every Sunday reporting on what he said. And that the reports of what happened in the New York Society would have. There was one of the conventions, the American Ethical Union Convention, was reported on by the New York Times. Can you imagine?
No.
Really not. But what they said, I mean, and okay, the Atlantic, it was the Atlantic Monthly. There was some philosophical article, whatever, that led me over to look at there. So I did a keyword search on Felix Adler. And he shows up in a couple of articles where they're just a reference to him, as if everybody knows who Felix Adler is. So they didn't have to put the founder of ethical culture, whatever. They just said, and Professor Adler said this on that subject. It's so meddling, yes. Concern to, I mean, John Lovejoy Elliott didn't there are not many addresses in there. He apparently wasn't so committed to being such a public speaker, but he talked about housing, and he talked about paying women fair wages to keep them off the streets. But I mean, in any case, helping women, and those are problems that needed legislative attention, because businesses and corporations weren't going to take care of it without pushing from government. You might know, how that works. So it's they were there.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more hands, so I'm gonna close the Q&A, and thank you so much, Carolyn. That was so very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
And I will transition to announcements. I have a couple, but does anyone, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, so there'll be a board meeting at 3:30 immediately after, well, not immediately, but with a short break for needed things after this meeting. So if you would like to join us for the board meeting, you are more than welcome. Our meetings are completely free and open to anybody who wants to join. Carolyn, if you'd like to sit in, you're more than welcome. That's a point I'd like to make. And so be there if you'd like to enjoy our discussion of the mundane, how the sausage is made behind the scenes. It's all there.
And we have very few people who actually attend our board meetings, but
Yes.
Fred is correct, and I forgot to put it in last week's newsletter, so my apologies.
Only the sausage peddlers.
Yeah.
It's good sausage.
Well, messy but good. Yeah.
Yeah, but we haven't included the arbiters. So
We're the grinders of the sausage. Yeah.
So other announcements. Wednesday will be our Chapel Hill happy hour, 6 to 8, and we'll be meeting again at Town Hall Grill in Southern Village. Although I need to check to see if there's a UNC game, because that is a sports bar, and
dear,
basketball is back. So I will check that, but plan on that location. And because they do have a table way in the back that probably be pretty far away from the screens. Also, and Chris, I guess I'm stepping on you a little bit, but the book group, I need to post that because we need to give people time, right, to read the book. So would you like to tell us which book is chosen? I have it on hold, and the date, if you have it handy. If you don't, near the end of January.
Well, I'll show you the physical book.
Okay.
Just have to step away.
Okay.
The book is called King A Life. Here is the book itself. I don't know if it's maybe backwards or not, but it's by Jonathan E.I.G. It's a very good book. Unfortunately, it's a little on the thick side, but I listened to it by audiobook, and the narrator was an excellent narrator. So that's one way to consume the book. I went ahead and got a physical copy because I want to go through and highlight some areas that are difficult to do in an audiobook. And that discussion is scheduled for January 21st although I'm going to make sure that I don't have my, yes, that is a Sunday. So it will be after our meeting at Extraordinary Ventures. So please come, whether you've read the book or not. You can always learn if you just listen to those of us who have read the book. But it's an excellent, it's the only one I've read about King, but I think it's well worth it, your time. So.
And I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about Mike Conrad, and I don't mean any disrespect from this, but it's another place where we will miss Mike because he usually attended book group, but he never read the book. You know, but he was very curious and always asking a lot of questions about the book.
And he always Googled information about the book and had information to provide that wasn't in the book per se. So he did contribute.
He did. He did, and we will miss Mike.
Yeah.
Sure. Maura.
Speaking of Mike, next Sunday, of course, is an in-person meeting. It is the last in-person meeting of the year because we're not having a meeting at all on Christmas Eve because there's just too many family things going on. New Year's Eve is going to be a Zoom type of a thing. And next Sunday, we're still trying to find out what Mike's family wants to do. We don't really know yet. So we are tentatively doing a remembrance of Mike, but we'll know for sure within the next day or so. But regardless, next Sunday will be a social type of a meeting just because it'll be the end of the year. And either it'll be a social type of meeting that is officially a remembrance of Mike, or it might just simply be an unofficial one, and we'll know soon.
And it will be a potluck, right, Maura?
It will be a potluck. That's very important. Thank you.
Next Sunday?
Yes.
Yeah, it will be in person only, you know, unfortunately for Zoom, but a potluck is not.
I do have a small caveat with that.
Okay.
If Mike's family wants to be involved and hear stories about Mike, we might make the first part of the meeting a little bit hybrid.
Okay.
If they're not in town. Again, we won't know yet.
Okay.
But then we will definitely transition to in-person only regardless.
Okay.
So it's sort of up in the air because, you know, it's hard when a family member dies, especially if it's something that's really wasn't expected. And
17.
I'm not surprised they haven't given us a decision yet.
Thank you. Jan?
I was just saying that in regards to Mike, if we do something, he's got a large circle of friends outside, you know, that we don't even know about. And if we, you know, I don't know who might create another memorial event, or if we would
I
be
can
it.
actually answer that. Mike Pasinke, Michael Pasinke, the friend of Mike's who's been coordinating, does want to do a large thing. In fact, he had a restaurant in Durham that he was interested in possibly using for that.
Mhm.
But I sent Michael another response email today saying that we were potentially doing this and that on the 17th, and asking him if he would be willing to and comfortable with sending that on to other friends so that they would know that this was one possible place that they could come and do remembrances. But there may be other things, and if there are, then we'll know about it through Michael.
Yeah, I was just wondering about holding off on it so that, you know, there would be one thing, but
Well, that's
yeah, it
possible.
doesn't matter.
That's something we'll be
Okay.
discussing too.
Okay. Chris, do you have closing words?
Yes, I have a very brief closing word, and I'm going to tell you how I found it. One of the things I love about Facebook, aside from the family connections and the political humor and other stuff, is that there's actually some people putting some wisdom out there that I find inspiring. And so in connection with that, I'm going to do a brief screen share. That way you can see who it is I'm referring to. James Baldwin, didn't mean to have everything else here. Are you seeing just my screen, or do you see everything else on my desktop?
His name or his picture in the quote.
Yeah, just the picture and the quote.
James Baldwin sounds very much like an ethical culture follower. He said, "The longer I live, the more deeply I learn that love, whether we call it friendship or family or romance, is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light." That seems to me to be very in keeping with Adler's vision of somehow or another, our work involves not only finding our own light, but bringing out other people's light. So I just thought this was a perfect quote to end with today. So even though he wasn't an ethical culturist, I think he was in the spirit of ethical culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I need to stop sharing.
And our meeting is concluding. And the board will meet at 3:30. We'll keep this particular connection open. And Carolyn, again, thank you very much. And
That was really great. Thank you.
yeah. And thank you for Chris for a moment of silence and closing words, and Maura for all that you do as program person. And thank you for attending.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, see you all at 3:30. Anybody who is excited about being there, join us.
Thank
And
you.
board members, we expect you to be there.
Excitement or no?
Yeah, just to clarify. Thank you. Bye.